Hello everybody. This is a video that I've wanted to do for a little while and time got away from me, but here we are at last. And I want to do a bit of a breakdown of the trailer that I created for the book. I tried very hard to get a lot of things just right, and so there's a lot of little tidbits that I just wanted to share with everyone. So let's go through it, and I'll mention a couple of points of interest that I hope are of interest to you as well. So right off the bat, when we begin here, this was a bit of a tricky edit to do because, well, first of all, everything that I have for this in terms of video assets, it's all stock footage. It's all royalty-free stock footage because, of course, I wanted to do this professionally because we're doing a professional thing here. So finding the exact angles that I needed was tricky consistently. In this case, the raw footage that I used was actually, well, now I can't remember if it was zooming in or zooming out, but it wasn't a constant, it wasn't the same, not angle, but it wasn't the same shot, shall we say, of the beach here. I wanted just still steady camera angle with the wave coming in, and so what I had to do was basically digitally do the reverse motion of the actual camera here. I also had to change some of the lighting and stuff because I decided to be consistent with the sort of progression of time that I had. Kind of a theme throughout the video here was basically the idea was we're going from sunup to sundown in the video, and then sunup again, which we'll touch on a little bit more. So I wanted this kind of dawn feeling on here, and it was kind of a bright day, so I had to adjust the lighting levels as well as the color scheme that was going on here. And then, of course, we've got, as you can kind of see through here, the actual title that's coming through the waves here. And relatively simple effect that's going on in terms of the waves is that I sandwiched the title between two separate video tracks. This is the same video of the waves there. And you've just got the video with the color corrections that I described previously on the bottom. Then you've got the title as the middle of the sandwich. And then as the other piece of bread, you've got the waves again. But this time I used a keying effect. And for those that don't know anything about video production, keying effect, when you use a green screen, that is a keying effect. Specifically, they call that a chroma key, which is that you remove the green. You key out the green. In this case, I believe it was called, I think it's a luma key, if I remember correctly. But the idea is it's based on brightness rather than a specific color. And actually, in this particular case, I would have taken out anything that was too dark because the foam from the waves in here, those would be your lighter colors. So all of the darker bits from the waves I would take out. So it gives the impression that, oh, when the wave comes in, it reveals the title, which would just be like a wipe effect in there. And then add a little bit. I manually tried to sync up some of the ripples on the title. Doesn't quite work, but it's close enough for when I was starting to run out of time to get it out. I got this out the day the book was published, which ideally I would have wanted this out before that, but hey, it took a little bit longer than I expected, and at some point syncing the ripples exactly was not high on the queue compared to all of the other edits that had to be made. My name is Kennedy Frost, and I don't exist. I suppose I should address that right away, is that I am doing the voiceover for this, and I always kind of hate it when I use myself in some of my video projects, unless it's like a goofy kind of joke video, then of course I don't mind. But whenever I'm trying to do something serious, I always cringe a little bit at using myself. But, you know, it's a matter of efficient use of resources here. I have access to myself at all times. So rather than trying to figure out, which I could have figured out a way to get a different voice actor for this, but that would have been time and potentially cost maybe not intensive, time intensive for certain. And it ultimately wasn't worth it. Because the other thing about this, and it'll come in a little bit later, was getting the timing exactly right for the voiceover was crucially important, which meant I had to re-record myself several times. And doing a back and forth with that with a voice actor, probably over the internet, could have been very lengthy as well. All right, so the next thing here, we have transitioned into abstract land, as it were, and we're going to have this quick series of edits. Well, let's just look at it here. All right, so lots of things immediately start happening. And let's start with the music. The music was also something that I did entirely. I initially was going to find just a royalty-free track to use, and I didn't find any. I had a couple of good leads on some sources to use, but ultimately I listened to the tracks and didn't fall in love with any of them. And I've tinkered around with various music making software, and I said, you know what? We're just going to do this myself instead, which I'm pretty happy with how it turned out here. This is probably one of the 2 points in the song where the melody it comes through the strongest, specifically because I'm not speaking during this part. So we've got that very synthy, echoey, plinky sound coming in here with the main tune that I don't think comes through as often previously. We've got the Greek letters on the side, which stand for the various different departments of timepiece represented, some of whom might not have been met just yet in Book 1, but all who exist. We also have the, I guess we'll call it the word art that's going on here. Now, it didn't really come through very well in the final product, but if you look closely, each of these, and there are various buzzwords or keywords about the Time Gate book and universe and key concepts about that. But you'll notice that when each one comes through, you'll notice it keeps a little bit of the previous word in there. Often it's just a single letter. In this case, it was, meta time to hang time. So we've got the time in the exact spot there to do the transition. But often it'll just be a single letter that'll come through. And those, you didn't catch it as much, I don't think, when it's all flashing through. And of course, it's synced to every beat of the melody there, which was a little time intensive in the edit there. Actually, the biggest strain on that was that I thought when I started that I had enough key terms in there, and I ran short, and I had to go back and try to figure out if there was a couple of extras that I could add in there. Which I don't remember which ones they were, but they're probably the ones at the end. Also, the timepiece logo, and in just a couple of seconds, the Aechyr logo that's just floating around on here was an accident at first. Obviously, they're deliberate framings and movings in the final product, but when I was importing a lot of the assets onto the timeline, it's not the most professional way to edit, but it's how I edit because it's how I taught myself way back on the Windows Movie Maker, the old version that actually had a timeline rather than the last version of Windows Movie Maker I saw is doing something completely different, which, side note, I think is completely absurd because the 2005 version of Movie Maker that I used, or that ancient version, not a good software per se, but as a baby's first editing software, it was good enough in that it really was a stripped down, dumbed down version of your typical non-linear editing software. You go from that to Vegas, and you're not in a completely different landscape. Obviously, you could do so much more with something like Vegas because you've got more than 2 audio tracks, one of which is the native video track. or the native audio track synced to the video. I have so many memories of original Movie Maker, or whatever version of Movie Maker that is. And I don't remember which update that they did with Windows, but they replaced it with this different version that doesn't have like the usual timeline that every video editing software has. And it boggles my mind why they did that. I guess to be more user friendly if you're not into video editing, but I think that's absurd, because that's how I taught myself video editing, is that I started off with the small one, got the better software, and then got the better software, and then got the better software. And now that first step on the first rung on the ladder has been pulled out, and it offends my sensibilities. Anyway, point being that I would drag in all of my assets onto Premiere when I edited this, and one of the results of that, when I was shuffling them all around, because that's how I edit, is I drag everything in and I start shuffling them around, is that I had the timepiece logo kind of just awkwardly inserted over everything else. And I thought, I kind of like that. So then I started toying with how to frame it and make it move in such a way that it's not blocking everything else. One other thing to note about this sequence: our character portraits that are going in here. There's actually quite a few things to say about this. I'm trying... Okay, there we go. I'm trying not to focus on them too clearly, and I mean the way it's edited, you won't be able to see them too clearly. And part of the reason that I'm doing that is because I made them using a free internet resource called Artbreeder, which is like an AI art thing, a Madoodle. The idea being that it'll create images with quote-unquote genes in them, which then you can take several of these different images, in this case portraits, and that's what I've usually used as portraits. You take several of them, and you'll quote unquote breed the images. You'll mix the genes together, and it'll show you different options of how these mix together with the genes from the parent images. And then you can do that for several generations to try to get what you want, or try to, they'll also give you a list of genes on the side so that you can try to get the features that you want out of your portrait. And it's been a very useful tool for getting interesting images when I've needed those for other projects. But I didn't want the images I created of my characters with this tool to be the final version that really stuck in people's heads. It was really useful to get some images here, which would be useful for this project, because because most of this is just stock footage. So it's useful to actually have some image of an actual person in here. And by actual person, I don't mean an actual person, because not only does the fictional character not exist, but it's an AI image, so that person doesn't exist either. But you know what I mean. To get a human face in the project here was important to some degree, I thought. But also, I didn't want them to stick. I didn't want these to become something that would be easily fixated on, because at the end of the day, you only have so much control over the program that I was using, over Artbreeder. You can't really get exactly what you want with that. Or at least I can't with my level of skill. Maybe someone else can. But very interesting tool, very cool. But I didn't want to have that be the final say on the character images, which comes to this. And I was trying to sort of get the impression of like the effect almost being like if they were driving in a car and, they're in a tunnel and like one light goes over them, or they're driving down a dark street and like passing by that like one street light every so often, just a ray of light that gives almost like a 3-dimensional scan from front to back of their faces, which didn't quite work, but it got the effect across as much as I needed it to, right? I don't need it to be a perfect like scan effect. I just needed that abstraction in there that I think looks interesting enough. And kind of I couldn't go into depth into this if I wanted to, because a lot of it was playing around with the different effects and seeing what worked. But basically the idea was color the image and play around again with that. I think it was the Luma key, where it's changing the band of what isn't keyed out actually, so that at first it might be like, oh, only show the brightest bits, then show only the medium tones, then only show the dark tones. And that kind of roughly correlates to the shape of the face. Obviously not one-to-one by any means. It's not that perfect like 3D scan kind of a thing, but that's okay. Because I don't need it to be that, to get the effect I wanted. I don't actually need it to be like a perfect scan. I just like that interesting, it gives a kind of a sense of depth, I thought. And I just think it looks cool. And at the end of the day, that's what mattered for this. But yeah, only enough time for a couple of characters. I did wind up going, not going to linger on them because I don't want them. Although I did think this is the three characters I used was Kennedy, Scarlet, and Sane. When we'd be looking at Sane right now. And I did kind of like the one that came out for him, although it's not at all. If I actually had to give the image of Sane, this is not exactly what it would be, but I did find the image that I'd created rather compelling in and of itself, even though it's not an exact representation of the character as I see him. But I don't need it to be for this purpose. I suppose I should mention the time gate in there, very roughly seen. That skips back too much. But the time gate was interesting because basically I created this, obviously it's a very rough shape. It's just a basic outline. It's not photorealistic by any stretch of the imagination, which again doesn't need to be. But I did wind up doing a frame by frame thing to. I made each individual image frame by frame in order to get this. Not that that's a particularly complicated process. Actually, the most complicated part was making sure that they intersect in a that they intersect in a way that is possible, kind of. They don't line up one-to-one with any sort of realistic architecture, but again, it's on there so quickly that it doesn't matter. Also, obviously, the portal coming out here isn't directly synced with it, but that's again, a matter of efficiency here and for the purpose of the trailer. Like, this isn't photorealistic. This isn't supposed to look like a Hollywood movie or anything like that. This is just supposed to get the gist across and be a neat transition. This wasn't really part of the plan, the rough plan I had for the trailer, which I suppose I should mention at this point, that the way that I had worked this out in my mind was a very rough sketch at first, and a lot of the details came in with just finding what footage I had available. I had the idea of a tour through Aechyr was basically the premise of the visuals of the trailer here, obviously coupled with the narration, which is I'm going to give the premise of the story here in as quick and efficient of a manner as I can. When I first stepped through a time gate, I was erased from my own timeline. Starting out right away, we've got that kind of dawn lighting. We're on a bridge overlooking the ocean. Don't know where exactly this would be in Aechyr, but the point is we're starting with the sea. It's early morning. We're going in. As the music is going, you hear those accents, that the synth choir accents in there. And I had, of course, the flash of the time gate itself. I really liked the shape that I had come up with actually very late in the book. It was basically the last draft where I had the different shape of the time gate with the intersecting rings in there, which I really loved as the very last thing. I'm very happy with that in there, so I wanted to emphasize that in there. And obviously, the next time we have the choir sting, we cut to this image here, which was very important to have those flashes. And we've got, I think, one, maybe two more in the trailer here, which is supposed to be like Kennedy's memories from chapter 1 here of storming the beach. And this was another case of taking stock footage and very much messing with the lighting. This one is probably the most extreme example of that. And if you look at it for too long, probably like we're doing here, you can probably tell more. Frankly, this was just a bright daytime shot originally. And it was just me messing with it as much as possible to try to turn it into something that looked like night, and then to turn the highlights, the very white highlights of the foam of the surf, that reddish color there, to just give, obviously not to look literally like blood, but to evoke that kind of a reaction, basically. It's to kind of see, ooh, red liquid. And, just maybe some part of the human brain will react to that, or just be dramatic lighting, one or the other. You tell me, whatever works. That's what I meant. Blinded. Oh, and then of course we've got the interjection of quote unquote Kennedy, obviously in my own voice, acting as Kennedy's the response to the basic narration there, shifted to one side with some echo in there as an added emphasis. Let's go with that. Added emphasis. Punctuation. That's the word I was looking for. Added punctuation to the thought in there, which was really tricky to get to line up, because I didn't make all of this at the same time. And so I was trying to line up the visuals and music, the writing and the recording of the audio of the writing, to try to get it all together, because we've got the accent of the choir sting, synth choir notes in the music, right? And those are the cue for the visuals to change. And I wanted to have it where the image of the bloody red surf is going to happen synced up with one of those choir sittings, which means I got to have what I'm saying, what Kennedy is saying, what I'm saying in Kennedy's words, voice, whatever, has to be, I have to get all of that out right in time for the choir sting, so that we get that extra little Kennedy line where it's shifted to one side of the audio, to one of the channels. And that turned out to be really tricky to get right, because it's a case of it's several bars apart, these choir stings, and they're not evenly spaced, in the sense that it's like one's on the first beat of a bar and the other's like on the third beat or something like that. I don't remember. I haven't looked at the actual music for a while now. But the point is, there is some they're not every single choir sting is evenly spaced compared to the others, and the way that the actual text is written for what I'm saying, you have to get the exact right cadence of how you're speaking, so that, because either if you go a little bit too long, there's going to be this really long, awkward silence before the next choir sting comes in, or you're going to finish. Well, yeah, that's pretty much it, because otherwise you finish too early, it's the same effect. You finish too late, you have to wait. So you got to. And it was really hard to do it. I think it does wind up not sounding unnatural, but believe me, actually speaking and recording all of those lines, it was really hard to get it in time. And I had to do it several times, and it was probably the most frustrating part of all of this. And I went back and I had to actually rewrite what I had written so that it was even possible to say some of this fast enough to get in for the choir stings. And it's not as simple either as just adding in like another bar of music there, because then that can mess up the rhythm with everything else. And also because I'd have to go back into the program and then re-export it and everything else. But mostly the rhythm thing, because the rest wouldn't be too complicated. Moving on. Where once I was just another 18-year-old, I was a Marine. Now. All right, so we got our first transition there. So again, all of the background footage was stock footage, and it was actually quite a chore to find all of the stock footage from this angle, namely from like a car driving by, looking out the window, basically. Surprisingly, not a lot of stock footage like that out there, and less so that is totally free. But I did manage to finally get everything that I needed. This is the next step, the next progression on our journey through Aechyr. Obviously, we can still see ocean out there, but now we see a little bit more land. It's like a park going through here, and we don't quite have the same dawn tones going on. It is day, or it is morning at this point here. And the transition, basically, when I did get the stock footage that I needed, I just go through, find the interesting parts, and where I could, I liked kind of those natural transitions where like a physical object would make the wipe in question. Oh, I stopped that perfectly. So you can see here in this case, it was just a light post. So as it's going through there, it's wiping it clean. And I just reminded myself why I had the second image of, again, color changed stock footage surf here with that red effect and made to look like it's night. The reason why that isn't full screen is precisely for this transition here, because of the way the timing worked out. I could have had it go full screen and then wiped here, but I found that was a little bit disorienting. So instead, I shrank it down to be so that it's framed in there, so you still see that bridge shot as it's going by. And now it feels like it's more continuity. It doesn't feel like you're getting teleported around like, ooh, it was morning on the bridge, and now suddenly it's nighttime on the beach with the red surf, and then, oh, I'm day in the park. So that's why instead of doing another full screen flash, I had this one to be kind of a picture-in-picture kind of a thing. Actually, I just remembered that the bridge shot that I used there for the early morning, I think I actually repeated the footage between when I did do that full screen surf shot. After it cuts back, I believe that's the exact same footage started again at the beginning, because there is, on that particular footage of the bridge, there's some camera shake in there, and I wanted to minimize that as possible. So there wasn't a lot of long stretches without some camera shake. So I basically had to use the same long part that was smooth twice in a row. And of course you don't notice because there's no cut in the video that shows it like skipping back to the beginning. Now, so the overlays that I've got going on here, which is the next thing to mention, is that a lot of these I tried. Yeah, I don't think there's any that are in here that are meaningless, that they do not represent something. In this case, very clearly, and I believe it syncs up with what I'm reading off as Kennedy, is that it's supposed to display the idea of jumping from one point in time to another. In fact, this map of the various branching timelines, it is the same asset repeated several different times, but with like different effects applied to it and different perspectives used for it. But it's all the same map of the various timelines. In this case, it's got several effects on it to try to make it look like a hologram, basically. It's a little bit transparent. There's a glowing edge around it. Obviously, in this freeze frame, you can see like a static effect. Specifically in this shot, the static effects happen when our little target symbol here leaves a timeline or syncs up with it, kind of to be like, ooh, it's disrupting the flow. It's something unnatural is happening as the target, which is supposed to represent timeless, is leaving or re-entering a timeline. And the circles on here is like the temporal location of a time gate, the point in time that the time gate is synced to on that timeline. I can have whole sentences string together with nothing but the word time, apparently. I'm a timeless. I can travel to... Nice little spin there just to add something to it. Ooh, that was the other thing I was going to mention, is the actual footage in the background here, too, isn't the raw footage. I did add a couple of effects to it that really made my editing software chug, which is, there is, I forget the name of the effect, but it's messing with the colors a little bit so that the trailing edges, or the leading and trailing edges, that is, are slightly different versions of the color. It's almost like, maybe not quite an old VHS effect, but kind of like that. I don't know, something about that appealed to me for the project. I couldn't give you really a rational reason why, and it could just be as simple as I find it aesthetically pleasing. But I thought that added something to it, but it did slow down the software enough that what I actually had to do was I actually had to turn off the effect on all of the background clips. It's on all of them, but I had to turn it off for when I actually did the editing. And so I exported 2 versions. I did the first export without the effect on at all to make sure I had some version of the project. Then I went back and turned it on in all the clips and then saw if the project would actually export it like that or not. Fortunately, it did, but it took so much longer to actually render with the effect on there. Very minor. Was it worth it? I say yes. Any parallel world in time. I work for Timepiece. They're lying. That was an annoying little edit to try to get in there. Just the turning his eye white. Again, that's actually a snip from the same AI image I had of him. I'm pretty sure I changed the color also on the image. You can see there's some static there as well, but I think I added a little bit more of the purple lighting, the almost I want to call it like cyberpunk-esque lighting going on in there, which was just really, it was just changing the colors on the image. The lighting itself would have been part of the image, but trying to make his eye go white. And now that we're on the still frame, you can kind of see that it's not a very perfect job there, but it was annoying to try to get it just right. And obviously it isn't just right, but again, for something as quick as it was, for what it needed to be, it's good enough to be, hey, he's blinded. And of course, we've got another echo of his voice there from the different channel. I believe I did it so that I think there's 3 interjections, so that one's coming from one side of the, one's coming from like the left side, then the next one's coming from the right side, or vice versa. I don't remember if the third one switches back to the other channel or if I actually did it stereo for the last one, but I think I did it the other way around. We'll find out as we go here. But I think you can kind of see more what I was talking about with the color distortion. If you look at the bikers on here, you can kind of see there's like red on one side and blue on the other. It's not color accurate here. And of course, we see some beach here, which might have been better as a first shot after the bridge. But I think the reason I didn't do that is because it looks like this area, there's more signs of quote unquote civilization here. More signs of people is what it really is, actually. It's still built up in both places, like the other one's a park, obviously. Obviously, it's not like the natural world or anything, but there's more people in here. And I think I wanted to hold off on showing people. So that's probably why I didn't have any beach shots at first. At critical moments in history called flashpoints. Okay, that one was, I don't know if that translates super well on here, but this was important to me as I was editing. When we've got, I'm not actually entirely sure what we'd call this structure on the left side of the screen there, where it's kind of a pit in there. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but as it comes into frame, it cuts, and I try to do this like match cut with the corner of this next shot here. I don't know if it comes across quite right, but it's supposed to kind of like take in its place, be a similar kind of shape that it cuts to. Don't know if that really came across for anyone else, but it was something that I was attempting. And obviously the next shot here, we're a little bit further into our quote-unquote Aechyr, which all the stock footage that I'm using is from like way different parts of the world. I'm quite sure Aechyr is everywhere at this logic, but that's what you got to do when you're trying to get stock footage of a fictional country. Points. Timeless can interfere. So not only are we going into the more built-up area, and I'm glad I got a shot. I believe this is a museum, actually, that this shot is, but I'm glad I got a shot of this kind of stately architecture, I suppose we could get it. I think that helps with kind of the feel for what I was going with. But we've also got the fence projection, shall we call it. And once again, same asset for the timeline here, but it's just minus the like transparency and glowing edges and flickering of the previous time that we saw it. But it is the same timeline map and the same targeting symbol, the targeting reticle, whatever you want to call it. Projected with a different background, and I tried very hard to get it to match up with this fence, which was annoying, especially later on in this, because I don't even think it's the camera. I think it's the landscape. Maybe it's the camera. Either way, the fence doesn't stay like in the same part in the frame, so I had to kind of manually track the image to the quote-unquote projection onto it, and you have to change its size too, because it's not like a constant distance from the camera, I don't think, the fence that is. So I had to track it. The actual shot within there, the diagram of the timelines didn't quite come out the way I wanted it. Let me find the part. Fear and events, but when we do, we don't change. Yeah, here when we zoom in, what I really would have liked is if I could have actually gotten it so that the whole timeline, that whole map zooms in. Instead, I basically had to only have a part of it like kind of cut out, and then that cut out zooms in rather than the whole timeline map. It was just a little bit too tricky to get the perspectives to line up. It's fine. It's not a big deal, but I wish I could have gotten that to work here. To actually edit that, this would be a nested sequence entirely, which to any non-video or editing geeks out there, the sequence is just like the timeline, not the book timeline, timelines within the universe of Timegate, but it's just the layout of clips that you have in there. The order of clips, the sequence of clips, the sequence. And so what I would do here, and what I mean by the nested sequence, is that instead of having all of my assets here, instead of having just a single, let's say screen, to be simple about it, instead of having a single screen where I'm working with, I've got the background, and then of the build of the museum in the background, and then I've got the background of the hologram, and then I've got the actual timeline image. Instead, what I would do is I'd have a separate screen, which would have the colored background, the colored hologram background, and the timeline images, and I'd work on that and do all the little animations on there. Then that would be its own thing. And I would take that own thing, that own sequence, and I'd put that on top of the museum footage here, and then move it around there. So instead of having everything on one screen, to keep it simple, instead of one sequence, it's one sequence on top of another sequence. I don't think I explained that very well at all, but it's a workflow thing. It makes it easier to work with. You couldn't really do what I was describing without doing that, and it's not complicated in and of itself, but it's something you couldn't have done with Movie Maker. So very important. Anyway, the actual diagram that I'm showing, very important well, not very important, but interesting, at least in my opinion. I couldn't go into this level of depth in the narration, which I suppose is why I'm doing this video in and of itself. But this is supposed to be a fairly accurate diagram of the mechanics of time travel within the Time Gate universe. So what we're seeing right now is we obviously zoomed in on a single timeline branch. So we're looking at a single timeline right now, and the kind of transparent giant white stripe across there would represent the actual timeline. And you can see that there's a lot of little branches within a single timeline. What the heck is that about? Well, as explained at various parts of the book, I don't remember if they actually say this in Chapter 3 or if it's not until Chapter 10 that we really... No, it has to have been sometime before that. Might not have been Chapter 3, but they do explain at certain points in the book that there's technically an infinite amount of timelines, right? But we don't get access to all of them. So first off, the ones that we do have access to via the time gates are the quote-unquote more real ones because they're the more probable ones. And the probability is represented on this image here by how thick the various lines are. Now ignore the giant transparent stripe for a moment and just look at the lines underneath it. And you can obviously see there's a bunch of different thicknesses of them. Obviously, the really thin ones are going off to either side beyond the giant transparent white stripe. And the thickest of the lines on here is the one that's dead center in the middle of the semi-translucent white stripe. And that thickest one would be the most probable one. And there's obviously various points along the timeline there where it could branch off, but it's slightly less likely that it would go that direction. And as explained in the book, those that are less likely, but still extremely similar to the most probable version, to the official timeline version, they just get kind of covered up, so to speak. So you don't get I think the example I used in the book was the pancake versus the waffle timeline, which is the timeline is exactly the same, but in the pancake one, you had pancakes for breakfast, but in the waffle one, you had waffles for breakfast. But otherwise, everything else about the timeline is exactly the same. Well, they're so similar, and in the mechanics of my universe here, one of them, whichever one's more probable, even if by only 0.1%, that's the one that you'll actually go to on the time gate. And the other one just gets kind of covered up or subsumed by the other one. So if waffles gets that extra 0.1%, then it's the waffle timeline. And the pancake one, that you actually can't go to pancake timeline. I'm sorry if you like pancakes, but it's only waffles. So if you get in the time gate and you try to go to that particular timeline, you go to the waffle timeline only. So in this illustration, the pancake timeline would be one of the slightly thicker branches over here that we don't quite see. But the middle one is the most probable. And so that's what the white translucent stripe basically represents. It's all of those. It's covering up all of those pancake timelines instead, whereas the center stripe is the waffle timeline, and all the other ones are the pancake timeline, or the English muffin timeline, or the toast timeline. All of those get subsumed within the official version, which becomes the white stripe. Now, and the white stripe, this is the zoom up in the white stripe, and we can see that actually there's a bunch of little ones in there, but the zoomed out version, we'd only see the waffle timeline, which is the white stripe in this case. The timeline. We create a new one. So just as the voiceover there says, when we create a new one, we don't change the timeline, we create a new one. So this is an example of trying to visually represent a flashpoint, a creation of another splintering timeline. Now, the one thing this diagram doesn't show is that there would be already a extra probability of one of these minor branches, one of these pancake timelines would be already thicker than the others because it would already have more probability, but it wouldn't be like as probable as the waffle timeline, the main horizontal stripe on here. But you'd already have it be significantly more probable than all of the other little branches. But I only show so much. Sue me. But then we have got our targeting reticule, and just like last time, that's to represent the interference of a timeless. And in this case, he takes some action, whatever that is, near one of these probabilities that usually isn't quite good enough to split off into its own thing, but the timeless comes in there and he interferes with it, and you can see all the lines get thicker because he makes them more probable. He forcefully pushes them in that direction, which doesn't totally override the previous timeline, because the previous timeline was probable for a very good reason. But now the timeless is trying to push it into a different direction, so they become a little bit more probable, and the timeline freaks out. And that's a problem. It turns into a different, separate branch at this point here. Because we're outnumbered. Our enemy. Another example of a transition that I just kind of naturally had in there, which in this case was the bush, to wipe into our next phase here. Still kind of in the daytime, although this shot is much more overcast. Now it's kind of weird. We're moving on from like the coastline, that area, and now we're just on a highway in the middle. It was important to me to get like something with a little bit of hills or mountains in the background there, because we do describe at certain points that there are some rocky features of the Aechyrian landscape. So we've got that in here from the highway shot. Actually, this one, keen-eyed observers may notice some clues that this footage was altered. Namely, I spoke before of the difficulty of getting the correct perspective for the shots I needed. This one was not the correct perspective. This was at a slight angle. So it was, I believe, tilted, let's say 30 to 45 degrees forward, meaning that you imagine instead of looking directly out to the side of the window of the car involved here, you are actually looking at an angle. You're looking a little bit forward, which is quite a big difference from the camera's perspective. It obviously didn't look the same, so I had to use an effect afterwards to shift the perspective, make a pseudo shift. And of course, you can't really shift the angle of a camera in post. And the evidence of the fact of what I did here is visible on the stakes on the side of the road here. You'll notice they're not in parallel. It looks like the ones on the right are slanted a little bit, whereas the one on the left looks like it's still going straight up, but the one on the right is slanted to a degree. And that's because I've got a 3D rotation effect on this footage, but it can't actually change I can't really change the pixels of what is shot here. So instead of getting a true, genuine view to the side, because no post effect can do that, we've got this weird artifacting going on there, but that no one would notice until I just told you. Which brings us to Aechyr, as Other Me was just saying. And here, of course, we've got the Aechyr symbol, and I don't know if I mentioned this at any point in Book 1, so some extra lore. Why do we have the Roman numerals 1 through 12 on here? Well, there are 12 anoraks in Aechyr, and I don't even think I might not have mentioned what an anorak was in Book 1. I can't remember if that made it into the final draft or not. But an anorak, well, Sane is an anorak, and an anorak is a general of Aechyr. There's a few more perks to that position, but I think I'll leave that for the actual text of the book. Though I would note, so each of these represents one of the anoraks there, and each of the numbers does refer to a very specific anorak. And you might notice something about one of the numbers on this particular wheel as it adjusts to the correct position, so to speak. And that will be relevant for Book 2. But I think I'll just leave it at that. Aechyr is determined to seize control of... this shot was a nightmare to get, once again, same timeline image, except this time we've got the 3D effect and it's obviously scrolling towards us. And this was tricky for a number of reasons. First of all, because while it might seem really simple to have all of these symbols on one of the circles, which again represents the temporal location of a time gate on these various timelines, I actually had to kind of manually do that, and it doesn't work out great because, I mean, it looks fine, to give some credit to myself, but it was kind of annoying to figure that out because of the perspective that it's coming towards you. It's not purely linear. You can't just pick like start point, end point, go, and everything's fine. Like it doesn't perfectly track in there, so you have to add some extra keyframes involved, and of course you have to adjust the size, and that will change things as well because you want to make sure that the bottom looks like it's touching all the time, so it looks like it's standing on there. But a lot of the ways that the effects are based on, they're based on the center of the little images involved there, so that changes things. If I was really smart about it, actually, I think you can change that so that it is all of your changes are based on a different point. So the anchor point, I believe it's called. I could have had it anchored at the bottom, but I didn't think of that. So I made things hard on myself because I am very smart like that. But the other thing is, I think it comes through because of the colors and stuff, but the weird red diamond is supposed to represent, oh, this is a timeline that is owned by Aechyr versus obviously the timepiece symbol that's a timeline secured by timepiece. This map, actually, that I've got going here is... Now, I might regret saying this because I'm going to nail myself into this. It's vaguely accurate. Let me put it that way. I did consider rather carefully how I made this map. It's not just a bunch of random lines. It is supposed to roughly correlate to various times and be an actual map of the various timelines and the state of the Eternal War as it is now. In fact, if you look here on the rightmost line there, you'll notice it doesn't branch off of any timelines and it doesn't have any branches itself. It's off by itself because that would be the Aechyr timeline. So that's a thing to note. But the problem was, as I was going through here and looking through my notes and my grand overview, is that in total honesty, most of the timelines are in contention and they don't have a solid faction controlling it one way or the other. Now, obviously, Aechyr has got a couple that they've got on lock, so to speak, but most of them actually are points of conflict. And what I wanted to do for this shot, what this shot is supposed to be communicating, is Aechyr is dominating because, you know, they've got such a numbers advantage. I think I said 4-1 numbers advantage. It might even be more extreme than that. But in terms of control of the timelines, it wasn't as stark as I wanted it to be, and I had kind of set myself to. I had kind of had my mind set on this shot going through, which I do quite like, with the symbol overlooking it all, like the timelines are the spider's web here. But the actual images involved don't quite communicate the same story as far as the symbols on the timelines, that is, showing who owns what. So I tried to time when the symbols would fade in and fade out so that there was always more red in there than the timepiece symbols. All worlds, and exploit them for, well, whatever their cruel leaders want. But there's more to my story than that. Every night I remember storming a beach. Again, another wipe transition, not much to say about that. This was the point in the video where I was really kind of struggling to get some extra images in there. And I thought, you know what, haven't had quite the beach. Well, not just I haven't had the quite beach. Now he's actually describing his the visions again. And actually, you'll note that was the other thing, is that at this point I've got the effect of not the echo effect, but the focusing on one channel again here, so that the previous little interjections that I was making from, the they're lying kind of thing, it's coming to the surface now. No pun intended, where it's finally taken over the narrative, whereas before it was like breaking through the narrative and like, oh, maybe that wasn't actually supposed to be in there. Now it's like, no, that version of Kennedy is telling his story, talking about the beach here. And so I was struggling with a way to reincorporate those that footage of the beach there. Again, another color corrected thing. I actually had a lot of luck finding footage that I could use, not in the night. I didn't have luck that way finding night footage that I could use, but I did find a lot of footage that I could use that was like rocky beaches, which made me quite happy. But it was tricky figuring out a way that I could incorporate it here. And ultimately just kind of played around and decided, okay, we'll have water coming in here. But I do quite like the transition that I believe is the next one coming up. Beach of Marines. Wasn't the transition, but it is this waves coming in here. The transition was, of course, just another stoplight whizzing by. Now we're getting into town at this point. So we started at the outskirts of Aechyr, as in like right at the shore. All right, we saw the it's right next to the ocean. Then we're going through the middle of it, big empty spaces. We kind of saw the mountains. Now we're going to start moving towards the city here, and this is my least favorite stock footage that I've got used up in here. But I did like that it feels like a town more than a city per se. But the stock footage is actually coming from a shot looking through like the window of a train. And it's annoying for a couple of reasons. For one reason, because I had to push the footage, I had to digitally zoom in on the footage so that you don't see like the train window, which also makes it very blurry. And the other thing is that it's very shaky. And there's a tiny bit of stabilization that could be done. And maybe someone who's like way more knowledgeable about editing could figure this out more than I could, but really there wasn't much that I could do about that, which is why this doesn't last very long. But I did feel that it was important to have something that was more of a town. If I could have found like a suburb that didn't look like crap, I would have used that, but instead this was the next closest thing. It's fine. I don't have a huge complaint about it. What I do like, however, is the waves sweeping in. I did like it. Wound up being very simple kind of an edit there, because and you can kind of see it in the still here. I didn't like outline or rotoscope the actual waves themselves. Really all it is a faded wipe that's happening here. So it's just, a feathered edge, and it looked good enough. And because the brain kind of does most of the work for you, and the fact that it's a leading edge of the wave against actually I think it's more water. I don't think, or is it beach? It might have been beach. Either way, if it is beach, that explains a lot. But yeah, it winds up working. I didn't have to do more work. Work smarter, not harder. It's clear, but it never happened. And I do like how the actual footage is zooming in there too, which of course is why we have the zoom in, but it looks really nice on there. And the fact that there's like a second wave coming in gives a nice excuse for the fade out as well. And I believe we're about to hit a transition because we've got this bush coming in as well. Right? Maybe the answer's like I did really like this stock footage. Actually, this one I believe I also had to slightly alter the angle for. Although looking at the fence, I don't see any telltale signs that I had to alter it. But I'm pretty sure I did. I did like this one. It's, again, we're moving past the town into a little bit more kind of industrial, but we can see the water. And it's very important to me that there is a connection to the sea with Aechyr, and obviously we've got a lot of that with the various images from Kennedy's dreams coming in here, and the coast and the sand and the beach, very, very present here. Here, on this island, the country of Aechyr, which... And of course, we've got our little rough map here of how things look. Really not much more to say from that. I did kind of really work myself into worry about trying to get the, it's a really simplistic flag, but I needed something on here, and it's fine. I'm relatively happy with it for what it is, but there's a lot of people that have spent a lot of thought and time into what various different flags mean and the like, and what they all look like, and ultimately I'm coming up with this like relatively simple, what would you call it? Icon. The word icon is the best that I could describe with it. It's almost digital in its simplicity, and it doesn't really match up with how most flags look. But I guess creative license. I do like the general shape, if maybe not the finer details of the eagle that I've got going on there. It does wind up look a little bit different. You've almost got kind of a heart shape going on, and I did kind of like that, or a shield with the wings and kind of more of a heart with the inner body. And I did kind of like that, and I do tend to like the slightly more abstracted or stylized version for like a symbol going on here. Even if it might not really fit with what should be on a flag. But hey, it's, like I said, creative liberties. I'm relatively happy with how it came out, though. If I had like all the time in the world, I would work quite a bit more on making sure that all of the details, that there's more details going on, especially at certain places. But enough said about that. It exists in one timeline, and it's reaching a flashpoint. This is, when I started out, I had a lot of ideas for the various visual flares that are going to start happening in the foreground. Obviously, I had a strong concept for the background, the tour through Aechyr, which, speaking of which, we're getting into kind of the afternoon in the heart of the city going on right now, or we're almost there. We're on another bridge. We're overlooking the water. But some of the foreground, there were certain points in the video where I was like, darn, I really thought I had all of the foreground assets that I needed, but I guess I'm running out here. So I wound up trying something a little bit more abstracted here, and the different stars. We got the 8-pointed star and the 4-pointed star. And if I remember correctly, and I'm about to find out, the 8-pointed star is, like, in theory, supposed to be like, oh, this represents the queen, and the 4-pointed star is supposed to represent the princess. And kind of be like, oh, we're taking out, these are all different elements that are interacting together to be represent Aechryan society, and we're going to start to remove important aspects, and it destabilizes the whole system. Aechr's queen is sick, and their crown princess... I was right. I remembered correctly my own video. The 8-star thing is supposed to be kind of like the queen, but just I don't know if it works necessarily on a symbolic level, but it's something to look at. Sophia is missing. All Anarakia needs is to find her. And of course, we've got, again, more images, much more clearly. These are more Artbreeder images of characters, and I'm very intentionally not pausing on them because I don't want them to be focused on too much as the final versions of the characters. But I believe we see, I think, pretty much all of the 4 main teen or young adult women that are, if not secondary protagonist, well, I guess they wouldn't be secondary protagonists, important characters in here, namely Scarlet, Quincy, Avery, and White Rabbit. not necessarily in that order. I believe we see all 4 of them flashing through here. The idea being that at least some of those are possibilities as to who is actually the missing princess in question. That's why we've got their faces going past at this perspective, which actually makes me wonder if I really did include White Rabbit, because let's be real, she's not a candidate at any point in time here. But yeah, I did try to have them so that they only appear in kind of the shadows here when something cuts in front of the camera. And again, there's been some distorting of the images, so it's not just like a straight up picture of their face. Unless we find her first. I don't think White Rabbit was in there, unless she was very early on, and I forgot already. I really liked that transition. I worked very hard to make sure that it happened while under a bridge here. Obviously, we are in full-on city at this point, and I'm quite certain that I added the zoom out that's going on throughout this particular thing, and I also added a little bit of color adjustment here to try to make it more like it's afternoon, because I didn't have a ton of footage that was good for like day in the city, and I always like shots of the city at night more than anything else. So we started out with, it was morning as we were coming into Aechyr from the ocean. We were at full day through the middle of it, getting into the city, and now we're going to end the day. This is afternoon time, and we're going to get into night as we get into the final city shots. And we are also about to see I believe they're the last portraits that I use in here. Let's see. My best friend, Blake Anthony, our leader, David Green, and his partner, Randy O'Neill. Yeah, so those, of course, as he says the names, and that was another tricky part of the timing, because as he says the names, he says them right before the choir stings again, because they're synced up. The images that they flash in front of the screen here are synced up with those choir stings again. And very important to get that timing right, and a little bit tricky, because I think at this point it was kind of the opposite, or was a combination of having to also speak quickly, and then at some points maybe slow down just enough so that we can get the timing correctly. So it's this weird, I don't think it sounds that way. I think it sounds fairly natural, but from the recording, when I was doing the recording, it was a lot of speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down. And it was a little bit tricky to get that rhythm just right, but I think it sounds just normal. I realize at this point I haven't been talking too much about the music itself as we go through here, and I kind of regret that I haven't said that, because I think we missed a point. So I think I am going to actually go back in the video a little bit. There's want, but there's more to my... Yes, right in through here. So a couple of points about the music as we're going. So cutting back after the beginning, because we're outnumbered. Actually, right in through there. We create a new one. That's a problem, because we're outnumbered. So the piano here is what I wanted to get at. So I took a pretty simple approach to the composition here, because frankly, I am no compositional genius by any stretch of the imagination. So it's a relatively simple process that I went through, which is that, I'll add a couple of different layers of instruments and melodies and whatnot, and then just kind of layer them in as it go. Vaguely a minimalist approach to how I do things, I guess. I'm not pretentious enough. I'm not educated enough to be that pretentious. But the point is, so, we had that melody at the very beginning with the synthy, whatchamacallit, when there wasn't any narration there. And that melody will come back in the end. And I might have actually used a variation on it here with the piano. I don't remember. But that wasn't actually the point I was going to make. The point I was going to make is that what I would do elsewhere throughout here is that I start out with, so we've got the like chords that are being hammered in, and I think there's kind of the fluty sound over top of that that's just like the same chords, but it's just just setting an atmosphere basically, and then you'd have the choir stings, and that's basically the music for the starting bit here, and then a different melody will come in. And originally it wasn't going to be this piano, it's going to be the bit that we hear in a moment, but I realized I needed more time. I didn't have enough with the music, so I actually had to go in, and I've done this a couple of times when I've created compositions for like a video project or something. I realized, oops, I got to the point a little bit too quickly. I need more time, so I had to insert this little piano bit here, which is just kind of plinking around, to be honest.
Our enemy, Aechyr, is determined to seize control of.
I think it is a vague take on the opening synth melody, but it's been a little too long, so I don't remember.
All worlds and exploit them for, well, whatever their cruel leaders want.
So this part coming up, this was originally, there wasn't going to be that piano bit. We were supposed to go straight into this here. And in fact, I almost feel bad for this little melody because it was supposed to be kind of the secondary melody, because we were supposed to have that like opening synth bit. That was like the main melody, and it's going to come back again later, as we'll hear in however long it is before I get to it after babbling this long. But this bit that I'm about to play here winds up only existing for a couple of bars, and I never actually reincorporated it anywhere else. Which, yes, is kind of silly considering I just added that piano bit there to fill time. But I felt very strongly about not using this upcoming bit, not extending it forwards or backwards, so to not having it come in sooner is what I'm trying to say. I wanted it to come in specifically at this point within the preview because, what is it? I think he's getting into talking about his dreams at this point.
But there's more to my story than that.
Yeah, exactly. He starts going into, but here's what I think my real story is. And I wanted it to sync up with that moment. It's a little bit, it's not really more dreamlike, but there's a different tone to it. It's a little more wistful, I want to say, compared to like the piano bit that's just kind of somber, a little, not quite dour, but there's a different mood to it, whatever word you want to use for it. Whereas I felt this bit, this little synthy, whatever you want to call it, I almost want to call it like an organ, but it's not really an organ sound at all. I wanted this specifically to sync up with when he starts talking about, oh, this is the dreams and the visions that I've been having. But it only lasts for this segment, which in a way emphasizes that point that this is a special thing to talk about. But I do quite like the melody here, and I didn't use it again. Whoops.
Every night I remember storming a beach of Marines. The memory's clear, but it never happened, right? Maybe.
Yeah, and then it's gone straight into saxophone, which is fun in its own right. But that was the point that I wanted to make about the music. So let's return to where we were.
Blake Anthony, our leader, David Green, and his partner, Randy O'Neill. We're just trainees, but it all comes down to us.
All right. So there wasn't a great transition into night specifically. So that shot that I had made look like sunset, or kind of look like sunset. If you look closely, you can tell that it was originally day. I could say why, but I'm gonna not to, just on the off chance that nobody notices, and I can pretend that I'm much more clever than I really am. But so we kind of just have this immediate transition into night that's a little bit rougher than I would like. I did play with the colors a little bit here so that you can kind of see it gets darker in the clip here, but I mean, no one's fooled. This is obviously a night shot. This is not oh, the sun has just set, but I had to at least try something. But you can only tweak footage so much unless, again, like maybe someone who's like an editing genius and knows how to work After Effects in and out. But I don't know the first thing about After Effects. This is all Premiere, baby.
My answers, this timeline.
Oh, I am really happy with that time gate shot. It is kind of cheesy, but actually that was an early concept that I had for the trailers. Like, oh, I want a shot where it's like, we're going to have the time gate goo that's in there, and then it's going to turn into the sea. And that didn't really make it in here. I instead have a shot of like the sea in the middle of the time gate. I still like it, but there wasn't that original concept that I thought, oh, that would be such a strong image. Didn't actually make it into the final product. Whatever.
An eternal war. It's all right here, right now.
Okay. I stopped it. I should have let it play for a little bit, but this bit right here. So I mentioned before, have the struggle to find shots from this angle. And in fact, you can tell that this isn't the right angle anyways. This was another shot that was more at an angle instead of like straight out the window. And I did correct it, and I let it slip back into
Eternal war
angle as things go on. So if you look at the railing along the bottom left side here, you can tell that this is being shot at an angle. And that's fine because of what it's going to lead into here. And the reason for what's going to happen, we're going to have the turn the corner moment. The reason I have the turn the corner moment wasn't an original part of my vision. It was really an effect of having such a hard time finding stock footage of looking directly out 90 degrees out the window. And I couldn't find any, particularly for the city, that, again, wasn't... I could find some, and it tended to be crap. So, at some point, I said, well, what if I can make it like... As soon as he's done with the narration, we can have it like this big moment, like where we turn a corner and the perspective changes so that now we're going forward, like into the screen, or it's coming out of the screen at the viewer, kind of a thing. And the thing is, there is no stock footage shot of the camera angle changing as you turn the corner. That doesn't exist. So I had a lot of trouble figuring out how to achieve this effect, because I've got a lot more footage of, like, you know, a straight on camera in the perspective of the vehicle that is driving forwards. It's a lot easier to find that sort of stock footage. And so I'm like, I want to use that. But how do I get the transition in there? And I really liked the idea of, oh, we've had this consistent motion that we're going to one side consistently. Consistently, we're going this way, and then we're going to suddenly change. And it's going to, like, you can almost feel it, that there's something has happened here because we've suddenly changed the momentum. But I don't have that shot. So what the heck do I do? Well, I'm about to show you what I did, which, yeah, it worked out. So first off, we can already see that we're kind of just changing angles already, just because this footage was just shot at an angle, and I'm just letting it be what it is, because that's going to transition into the next shot, which is pretty important.
Right here.
So we transition into this next shot here, and again, it's more at an angle. That's just the nature of the stock footage, is that's how it was taken. And what was important about this one is that it's a car that's going to turn the corner. Now, the camera angle is not going to change. At the end of the shot, it's still going to be looking out to the side, but at a slight angle, which is not what I want. So somehow I have to create the illusion of the camera also, at the end of the turning the corner, the camera has to be facing forward. How do we do that when I'm not shooting the footage? I was really tempted to actually get out my own camera and get this shot until I realized how tricky it would actually be, because you'd have to turn the camera as you're turning the vehicle, but you can't the camera would have to be like mounted outside the car, because otherwise you're going to catch like, the car as you turn the camera, you're going to see like, the corner between the side window and the windshield. You can't not see that, and that'll ruin the entire effect. So in order to not get that, I'd somehow need to have the camera mounted like outside of the car and still know to turn when I turn the corner. I'm like, yeah, okay, I can't do that. I can't create the footage that I need. So what I wound up doing is convenient splicing, basically. So this guy's going to turn the corner now. So here we go. He's starting to turn the corner. We're getting there, and I think, yep, you can probably tell if you look here, we're looking at two different shots at the same time right now because the horizons don't actually match up. Now, granted, the footage that we've just been watching, which is now on the right side, I think that's actually looking up at a hill, so that might not actually be the horizon, but I still don't think they match up, even considering that. But this is what I did. So as footage A, the footage we've just been watching, is starting to turn the corner, again, we're going to use one of the natural features of the footage, this pole, whatever pole this is, and we're going to use that to create a wipe into a different footage in stock footage B. Stock footage B is shot from the perspective I want, looking straight out the windshield going forward. And so what I just did is I found a point in stock footage B where they turn the corner. So as stock footage A is turning the corner, we're going to transition into stock footage B turning the corner, and it's going to go by quick enough that you're going to get the impression that the camera angle has changed, but really we've just switched between stock footage. So let's watch all of that together, shall we?
It's all right here, right now.
So it's so quick, you can't really tell it. Well, you can tell that, oh, we were looking at one stock footage, now we're looking at another, but it's not like really jarring. It does feel like the camera has just shifted position because it's happening as you turn there. So I'm very happy with that. Note about the music. Before we get back into more stuff about the shots, note about the music here. I was kind of mentioning before that a lot of what I would do is it's just kind of, at this point, relayering in different melodies or motifs that I already had going on in there. So in fact, this, I think it's another saxophone sample that I'm using here, but it's the melody from the beginning that was done on the synth, except now it's on the saxophone. And then I've got the stuff going on. You've got the choir accents that have been there. That they were there at the beginning. I think they dropped out for a little bit and they came back. Maybe they were there the whole time. Now I can't remember. Basically, all of the stuff that was happening the whole time, because it's the same chord progression going on the entire time. So I just basically am bringing everything back, and I think there's one or two other layers that are going to be added on top of that. And it's just repeating the stuff that had come before, but with a slightly different instrument plugin going on here. Very simple thing, but that's, creating music on a time limit and a budget. The other thing is the shot that we're looking at, if it looks weird or wonky to you, first off, if it doesn't, good. That makes me happy. I'm glad you didn't notice anything. But if you did notice anything, that's because it is weird and wonky, because this wasn't nighttime originally. It was like dusk. Obviously, you can see that the lights are on and stuff, so it wasn't daytime. But it was like dusk. It wasn't the sky wasn't dark enough for what I wanted, especially considering the last shot was just night. In fact, that was another problem that I was having, is that while I did have a fair amount of city night driving in here, not a ton that was terribly great quality, but while I did have quite a bit of that, some of the other stock footage was becoming day again. So I said, you know what, let's just finish the cycle here. We're going to have the sun come back up, and we're going to, we've gone into the heart of Aechyr, we've gone into the city. Presumably this is supposed to represent Thesiopolis, our capital city. And now let's start moving outwards, and we're going to use that same time gate asset from the very beginning. And we're going to use this to transition ourselves through the various different sectors and stock footage here. So yeah, this time I did make sure to track more properly when the time gate opens here, so that it's not just like a vague circle, which was easier than trying to get the portal effect to sync up, considering all the different layers that were going in there. Really, the limiting factor on the portal effect was the sparks that were kind of what are supposed to be sparks on the outside edge, because that was ultimately around circular image or a series of circular images. Here, it's a lot easier to just cut into the next stock footage here. So, ooh, well, haha, a little look into one of the things about Anarachia and the Anarchs. I didn't mean to pause on there, or the Anarachs, not the Anarchs. A little preview, I suppose. But again, my point was going to be more stuff about Anarax flashing before us. Okay, I can actually explain this. Here's something more interesting to talk about, which is, again, there wasn't any narration specifically for this, but this is to represent the mechanics of the arena. So it happens really quickly, so you're probably not going to catch exactly what's happening. But the idea of what's going on here is that, starting with the bottom graphic here, our circle is supposed to vaguely represent the fact that an arena has been created, and part of the timeline, instead of being horizontal, as it normally would have been, is now vertical, meaning that these are all draft versions of the timeline. When we finally hit the final iteration, we'll see that it goes horizontal and joins up with the timeline. You'll also notice that the vertical segment never meets the edge of the circle here. That is because it is certain arenas can have a time limit, so to say. So let's say, for example, you're in front, you're on a train tracks, and you activate the arena, and there's a train coming. But you activate the arena and you have a fight. You actually can have a ton of iterations going on there, as long as no single iteration lasts long enough for the train to hit you. Meaning, so for example, if that train is going to come and smack into your arena in 2 minutes, no single iteration can last longer than 2 minutes. As soon as one of them lasts longer than 2 minutes, the arena collapses because the train hit it. And then it soon hits you. So that's why we've got this vertical segment never hits the edge of that. That kind of represents the longest any single iteration could last in this particular configuration. Now, the maze diagram in the upper left is basically to represent the problem that someone is trying to solve within an arena. Now, usually arenas will be created in a situation where you have to fight someone. There's a lot of fight scenes in the arenas, but actually in the first book, we also see Kennedy demonstrate that the arenas can be used to solve other problems as well. So in this case, the maze is just supposed to be a representation of, oh, there's a problem that needs to be solved. So every iteration, we see an attempt to get through the maze, and at some points when they hit a dead end, or they're about to hit a dead end, that's when it resets. And then we'll see that when it finally gets to the edge of the maze here, that the vertical segment is going to become horizontal again, and the timeline's going to continue on because the arena is complete. They've solved the problem. So that's the point of this graphic. It's supposed to be an illustration of the principles of using the arena and the time gauge. Okay, this one is probably my least favorite. I tried to represent something, and this was a factor of running out of time. Quick note on the visuals, we can see that this was actually taken from the same stock footage, I believe, as the turn going in there, except this time I didn't mess with the sky, so this is more of the natural tone of the sky in that particular one. I left it alone in this one because we're supposed to be getting to the point where, oh, it's getting light again. It's becoming morning again. But let's talk about the graphic overlay, which is what I was going to before I got distracted. This is kind of supposed to represent, not kind of, it is supposed to represent someone or something getting removed, like as if by an enigma, someone getting clipped, but the timeline continuing on as if the timeline can, or like a timeless being removed from their timeline, but the timeline carrying on virtually unchanged. So we've got the green, blue, and purple stripes going on there, contained between the white lines. And the white lines are vaguely supposed to be the span of the timeline. So it's like we're looking at a zoomed in image of the timeline, basically. And there's those trapezoidal bumps on the timeline. Those are basically just supposed to represent events which don't deal with our green, blue, or purple characters, because that's vaguely what those are supposed to represent, is their people's personal timelines, if you will, their personal trajectories. And the orange circles are, again, other events or things that those characters would do, whereas the bumps would be stuff outside of their lives that nevertheless impact their lives. So, for example, it's not illustrated very clearly because basically I did this rather rushed and it's not the greatest example. So, for example, the first bump impacts Mr. Green's timeline here, and he in turn affects everyone else. And until the second bump affects purple, and purple affects everyone else, kind of a thing. So, presumably, these would be like three people who know each other. And then changes as blue is removed from the timeline. Perhaps blue became a timeless, for example. He stepped through a time gate. He no longer exists, but the timeline as a whole is the same. So how does that work? Well, in this case, it's going to fill in the gaps, basically. So you can see this is a very rough illustration, but whereas before, I think blue had that first orange ring. Now purple will have that first orange ring. Green will still get affected by the first bump and affect purple. Purple still gets that second orange ring. And now it's off center because I didn't do this image very well, frankly. But the idea is that purple would be affected by the second bump and still affect green, and still. Apparently purple does all of these circles now. I think green was actually supposed to get maybe that first circle. But frankly, this graphic was rushed. And that's why it's not very good, to be frank about it. But that's also why it's here, where we've got a lot of other graphics going on. But it was, all of the graphics are supposed to represent, at least to some degree, the various mechanics that come up, particularly in Book 1. So again, I really like this footage, actually. I did do some color adjustment with it as well to really get the dawn feeling. Actually, I think I did quite a bit, but it works really well, I think, for the sun is coming up. And again, we're kind of traveling out of Aechyr now, or out of the capital at least, and moving on. Yeah, I just really like the tone of this footage. Again, same timeline map though, and just kind of at this point, I'm like, ooh, I did all of the major mechanics that I wanted to demonstrate in here. Shoot, I still need some more graphics. So unfortunately, we've got a little bit of recycling going on here, but it's so quick, and I think the background visual is more important here. So one other note about the music, actually, which is there is one unique layer added on here, which is the kind of vaguely harp sounding thing going on that's just like kind of an arpeggio, or at least notes in the scale that's going on there that just adds a little bit of flavor. Real simple stuff, but it's all about how it all adds together. So I'm pretty happy with the music, to be honest. I quite like how it all came together. So I'm very I'm proud of how it all came together. Nothing to say about that graphic. It's just a bunch of years. Actually, originally, I think I might have tried to incorporate that into nope. nope. I was thinking about adding it to the timeline scale, but I ultimately decided not to, just in case I needed to make any changes to specific dates in later books. And I'm like, I'm not locking myself in. But frankly, by the ratios of how everything is related to each other, I kind of already am. So, whatever. I actually really wanted those series of years to go on a lot longer, but I had trouble with getting the image because it's a very short but long image, and I had a lot of trouble getting it to save properly. But anyway. Also really like these actually last like 3 shots of these the stock footage here, the drone shots going through here. I really like them, and I'm glad I found them, and I think they're very strong to go out on. I like this again, sunrise. We've got very strong image there, and the sun's going to be up in the next one, and I really like the image that we've got. I had to speed up the footage to get it to match with everything else for this shot, but again, I just think it's a very strong shot. And then that last, finally going back to the beach again, we've got kind of a rocky beach. And this one, you'll probably notice, is that it's reversed. The footage here is reversed because the actual footage was going away from the rocks in the distance there, but I needed to carry on the motion here. I need to go towards the rocks here. So as a result, the surf is going backwards. Pretty obviously, and I'm not trying to hide it. I'm not embarrassed at saying that, and I'm just like, yeah, that's what it is. I don't know, rationalize why that is. It's because it's a book about time, so it's going backwards because we're going back in time or something. I don't, it's I would rather keep the motion involved here than worry about it. If I could have found a different shot, however, that was going forwards like that, I would have used that. But considering how perfect, frankly, the beach looks here, it's not like a super rocky beach like some of the other images that I used, like for the flashback and for what is implied in chapter 1 here. But that's honestly kind of perfect, this kind of cove that we've got going on here, because I think it's the perfect mix between like, oh, that looks beautiful, I'd love to be on a beach like that sort of a thing, which is for like the friendly version of Aechyr, but it's also clearly got its rocky outcroppings and the little, I guess, sense of danger maybe, which would tie into Kennedy's dreams. And I'm like, that's perfect to be both aspects of the visions that Kennedy is plagued with and the hopefully warm and inviting nature of Aechyr itself. So really happy to end on that. And of course, I got to get the title of what this whole preview has been about here. So we've got a smack zoom in on there. I tried a couple of different versions of how to get the title in there. In the end, the blunt, cheesy way wound up working just fine for me. And then the piano outro here is definitely a take on the original synthy bloop bloop at the very beginning of the thing. I thought I'd wrap it up with that again. And not much else to say about the music there. The footage here, again, kind of color changed. There's not really a strong rationale in terms of like the day-night cycle that I had beforehand for why this is so pinkish, because obviously the last couple of shots that we had were like late morning. So it's no longer dawn, so I can't justify like this, and we didn't even get midday. So again, I can't say like, oh, we've gone all the way back to dusk. I just really like the pink and the blue that's going on here, and so I just played with the colors until I got it to something that I thought was interesting. And again, I already kind of added a little bit of a purple tinge to a lot of the stock footage anyways, so I liked how this would end like that. With kind of this color going on. As for the actual image of the book there, pretty sure that's not actually a still image. Because what I wound up doing, I tried using the image that I used for my website to be the icon for like, ooh, buy the paperback here. And it just looked bad next to the stock footage. because it's good enough for like an icon, but I wouldn't want it to actually represent a book there. And obviously I'm using stock footage, so I can't just put my book on this beach that I'm filming. So I just took out my video camera and I put one of my copies of the book on there and took some footage of it. So I don't think there's any actual motion going on, but I think I see a little bit of motion in some of the reflection. Maybe from me behind the camera. It's hard to say. But that is video and not a picture of the book. And so then, you just, snip out the video there with a mask to have it in there. And that's that. I don't think there's really anything else to add. And at this, considering how long I've been talking, there shouldn't be. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how all of this turned out. It was probably more work than I thought it was going to be going into it, but honestly, I do really love the process of video editing for the most part. I can get caught up in little tedious details, and there's always some part that's kind of a little bit more annoying than I would like, but genuinely, the entire process is quite a lot of fun. And I'm happy that it turned out as well as it did, I have to say. I honestly, when I started out, the trip through Aechyr concept, I was pretty skeptical that I would be able to find enough to actually string it together. And there were certainly times where I didn't think I would find the shots. And when I was pretty late into the project, and I was like, I can't find the shots that I need. I thought I wasted quite a lot of time for something that wasn't going to work out, or that I'd have to settle for something that was half-baked that I couldn't really pull off, but especially with that turn in there, as silly as it is, that was very important to me as I was making this. But it came together quite nicely, and I did try to stack it as full as I could with little important bits. Most of those overlays, as I've explained, really aren't just random gunk that's up there. I tried to make sure that as many images as possible did have a meaning behind them and that they signified something. Obviously, a couple of them towards the end specifically did wind up a little weaker on that front, mostly because I had already used up. I thought I had an excess of a bunch of stuff, and I really did have a lot of things that I wanted to put in there. I just managed to find to be able to put them in there within a couple of seconds. They only took up a couple of seconds, and even in something that's only a couple of minutes long, that's not much time. So yeah, very happy with how this turned out. I hope this was entertaining, if not informative. And I appreciate you listening to me ramble on about something that isn't even the book itself. So that'll have to be for next time. And speaking of next time, I think the next time I do a large video project like this, it is going to be breaking down, more specifically, the mechanics of time travel. It's, of course, explained in the book quite a bit, but I think I can go a little bit more in depth, and doing it out of character might be interesting, to be able to just explain it a little bit more bluntly, just as the author myself. So I will see you next time with that.